Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. Whatever I got turned out to be more than just a cold, so I'm barely hanging in here today, but heck, I'll take this over everything I had last year. I don't know what the heck happened with that, but anyway, let's jump in and see what we got. First up on Floatplane, Shorjor wants to know if Lumacode signals can be passed through active switchers like Extrons or G-SCARTs or perhaps even the SVS. And the answer is probably yes. So Lumacode under an analog analysis looks just like a Luma signal. So you definitely wouldn't be able to pass it through the sync lines on an Extron crosspoint, but you should be able to through a composite video port. Now, the SVS, the current version that is shipping at the moment, the batch that sold out in like a minute, that would not be able to do it, but any of the future ones that are being made will be able to pass composite video and everything else through the composite video port. So we're going to have to just double check this stuff to make sure, but I'm 100% sure it'll work on a mechanical switch as long as the wires aren't super long. And I'm 99% sure it'll work on active switches through a composite video port as long as whichever active switch you're using also supports composite video. It essentially just looks like Luma, but for compatibility reasons, that's the analogy I'm going to make. Also, coming up very soon, I actually have an interview with the creator of Lumacode. So funny, it's almost like Shorjor planted this question in, but nope, that was a total coincidence. Anybody who supports should get that this weekend, and everybody else should get that interview on Monday. But good question. Now, switching over to Patreon, Noah wants to know if SNAC adapters for various FPGA platforms like Mister or the Analogizer require the controller to match the core that is in use, or if like a PSX, Saturn, or SNES controller can be used for all core platforms that don't exceed the button count. So it is exactly as if you were plugging it into your original console. So the short answer is in almost all cases, no. Things like Master System controllers on Genesis or vice versa work the same as original consoles. SNES should work on NES, but I'm not sure which buttons would be mapped to A and B. But for the most part, the answer is no, it wouldn't work. And that's with the Mister. I'm actually not sure with the Analogizer, but I'm assuming it works the same way. So the whole point of SNAC is to have a zero latency, not even a millisecond of latency way to interface these original controllers directly to the FPGA. And that's how you can get light guns working, because it's basically the same as an original console. So, you're going to have all of the incompatibilities that you normally would. But it's a good question, and I hope, I think for most people, though, USB adapters, standard USB, should be fine. I really think the only time you need SNAC, at the moment at least, is light guns. But yeah, good question, and it's one of those confusing things. But just remember that the Mister project is in the confines of the DE10 hardware, so anything weird like this, it's not because the Mister developers thought it was funny or something. This is the limitations that they have to work with, and the fact that they're figuring the stuff out as they go is pretty impressive. Next up, Tony Escobar wanted to follow up on the GameCube RGB question, and they decided to splurge and get an HD Fury 2 digital to analog converter, which would make it pretty easy to go from something like a Carby to VGA, and then you could figure out how to get down to RGB from there. And the two questions are, the HD15 discard that Tony also picked up, the plastic molding around the VGA input was too tight to fit a monoprice cable. They reached out to Rondo Products, who offered to send a new enclosure, but that is something that I have heard before, and I'm not sure what happened with that. The one that I tested absolutely did work with monoprice cables, as well as a bunch of Amazon cables, and really the common ones that I would recommend. So I'm not sure if there was a tweak to the design or if there's just something that happened, but if more people think that this is an issue, I'm sure we could figure this out and, maybe shave a little bit down from the inside of the case or just try to figure out a way to get new cases. But sorry about that. Glad that it's all taken care of, though. But the other question is, the HD Fury 2 manual states that our RGB HV sync can just be connected to PVMs by a simple BNC T connector. So that all depends on the PVM. Some absolutely can be connected without any kind of sync combining circuit, but you are sending double the voltage to that. So you want to double and triple check your service manual to get the exact voltage specifications on the sync line and see if that's possible. So if you can get I mean, I think it was 1 to 12 volts or something. One of them accepted. It was kind of crazy. There was one PVM that was built like a tank, but they're not all built like that. And I know for a fact certain monitors, I think XM29s, I can't remember, but certain require specific sync. And on top of that, you have to match the switches and dip switches in back. Otherwise, you could cause issues with stuff like that. So while it's possible, if it were me personally, I have, of course, done it both to test and because I just didn't know at the time. But ever since I learned about all of this stuff, it is my choice to never do that just in case. It's one of those things that buying something like an HD15 Discard or some kind of sync combiner is cheap enough that it would be such a fraction of a price to repair or replace a PVM that I just don't even think about it. And if I'm being overly cautious, I'm also okay with that because that means I'm making sure that you don't blow out one of your monitors. So I might be, over exaggerating on this for certain PVMs, but no matter what, double check the service manual. Tony specifically has a PVM 8044Q, which I'm pretty sure I've done the T adapter with before, but not for long periods of time, just to run quick tests and do a demo or something like that. So triple check that service manual to make sure the voltage can handle it. And if so, if you're comfortable with it, go for it. But if not, then I would just pick up any kind of sync combiner. Next up, Wieslow said they missed the sale of Arthremis's SVS. However, as they anxiously wait for the next modules to come on sale, they're wondering if I have a go-to VGA cable with affiliate link to recommend to send them to their RetroTINK 4K. So thank you very much for thinking about me. I always truly, truly appreciate that. And unfortunately, the cable that I've used for years and have been continuously recommending for years is no longer available from Amazon. I don't know if it's permanent or temporary. So I did find a monoprice cable, and I've had really good luck with that brand, but I would just double check to make sure you can't get it cheaper from monoprice directly. I think it was only like $10, so it's not going to break the bank. But remember that I haven't personally tested this one. I actually am 99% sure I have, but it would have been 2 years ago at the earliest. And you got to always remember that when they make batches of things like this, if you test 3 or 4 cables from one batch and they're all fine, it's a pretty safe assumption that it's going to be a reliable cable. But once another batch is made, you need to continue to test these things to make sure. And I have no idea if they're on the same batch, if there's multiples out there. So I'll drop a link to the one that I found that I've definitely bought in the past years ago, not as much as the other cable that I recommended, but I would, my favorite test is the first level in Super Mario World because of that bright blue background, and that's the very easy way to see if you're going to get any video interference. So I would try that, and as long as you're not doing something like mounting it inside your wall and covering it up with drywall after that, I think it'd be safe to pick this one up. And if you run into any issues in the future, you now have a spare beater VGA cable to leave in your toolbox. Because remember, these aren't expensive cables. It's not like I'm recommending a $60 cable for this or something like that. So I'll drop a link in the description, and hopefully it'll all just work out. And good luck on the next batch. I know there's a lot of people looking forward to picking that up. Next up, the Remora wants to follow up on why they're using both the TINK 4K and 5X. On the 4K, they have a CRT filter turned on, and the scan lines will not look great on a stream after the video compression. So they plan to have the 5X in generic 1080p going to their capture setup. Also, if they decide to travel somewhere, then the 5X goes with them instead of the much more expensive 4K. So that is the absolute correct scenario. You've nailed it. So that is the one time where you would need 2 scalers. I will mention, though, that in the Remora's case, they already owned a 5X and then picked up the 4K. So now the 5X could be used for streaming, it could be used as a dedicated downscaler, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if anybody else is listening and they have the same issue, getting an active splitter or switch with 2 outputs, sending one to the TINK 4K for your own gaming, and if you want to get a cheap thing for streaming, you could just get one of those crappy SCART to HDMI or composite to HDMI boxes from Amazon that definitely is going to be a lot cheaper. And in the context of casual streaming, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. I'll leave a link to that video I did on it, the worst scaler in retro gaming, because half of the video actually explains some very, very good uses for it that are not for gaming, but you'll see what I mean if you watch the video. But yeah, you nailed it, the Remora. That's exactly what you would want to do in that scenario. And if anybody's in a similar situation, go with the cheap, crappy ones at first for the streaming side, unless you're a pro gamer or just, maybe work really hard and have the extra cash to spend. And by all means, get whatever you want. Get the 4K Pro and the CE or something like that. But I'll leave a link to that video if you want to have a good laugh. Next up, Christopher Skirrick wants to know if I'm interested in and want to talk about that Sipheed Tang FPGA console. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly. My apologies. I don't mean any offense by that, but I'm very interested in it, and I would love to check one of them out. I haven't had time to do a deep dive on it, and I don't have the budget to buy every one of those things that comes out. So generally, and I know this is a lazy, siphoning off my friends thing to do, but I usually wait till one of my friends buys one and then I borrow it from them to do a live stream or something on it. So I would absolutely love to check one out and see what it could do. And I think for anybody who's unaware, these are meant to be dedicated FPGA consoles that are fairly cheap. So imagine the SNES core from a Mister in a box that has SNES controller inputs and HDMI out. That's a quarter of the price of a Mister setup. So they have the potential to be really, really incredible. I just haven't had a chance to test it, and especially because they're using the Mister cores that are already rock solid in most cases. Yeah, they seem like very exciting things to play with. But I'll just wait till one of my friends gets one and then I'll do a live stream messing with it. So great question. And I really wish I had the budget to buy every single one of these things and try it out. The budget and the time. I still have a pile of stuff there. I still have the, you could sort of see it in the background. I still have the Pioneer Laser Active modded for Doomsday to work on. So I'm backlogged for a year probably, but I'm going to try to keep squeezing stuff in. I hope to at least this weekend do the MemCard Pro stream. I got the brand new MemCard Pro and the recommended SD card for it. At least I think it is. So a lot on my backlog. I hope to get to all of it, but yeah, that looks like an awesome thing to try and I hope I get to it someday. Next up, Mike's Quiet said they're going to upgrade from an OSSC to the RetroTINK CE when it debuts. They feel like that's great for their setup. Just thinking ahead, they currently use a retro gaming cable RGB SCART connection. Should they plan on leaving that for the TINK CE, or do they use VGA or component cables? I would leave exactly what you have to start and kind of go from there. If someday you upgrade to the SVS, then you're probably going to want the VGA module so that you could do all of the auto switching, because that will work on the CE as well as the 4K Pro. But for now, I would leave well enough alone because all the inputs work perfectly on that. And then to go a completely different route, if they got the RetroGem HDMI mod, do I think that would make a noticeable difference? So this one's got to be up to you, and there are some things that I always try to recommend people put into perspective. Are you like me and most of your TVs are the absolute bottom of the barrel, cheapest thing you get on a super sale from Best Buy, or did you invest in a really nice OLED TV that you love to use? If you have a cheap TV or a fine TV, you're probably never going to notice the difference between quality analog video cables out of these consoles going through something like the TINK 4Ks. However, if you've already invested in, especially if you got a G4 OLED from LG, those are really expensive. So if you've already dropped the cash for something like that and you're buying something like a 4K scaler, you might want to think about getting just the best out of everything that's important to you. So even in that same scenario, you work hard, you got a bunch of money in the bank, you bought a really awesome OLED, you're buying the TINK. Do you love the Dreamcast, or do you just want to occasionally play it? And if you're like, no, I love it, it was my favorite console, yeah, why not? Because then if you ever need to bring it to a different TV, you want to bring it to a friend's house, you got a direct HDMI output from it, and everything just works fine. However, you would get a slight difference in picture quality because there would be zero analog interference. And I do think it's going to start, you could definitely see a difference if you really look for it, but I think it's going to have to be 8K scalers and up that you start to see this, because one of the downsides of scaling anything is that you scale the entire signal. You scale the video signal as well as all of the interference that goes through it. So that's really going to be up to you to decide if spending that much money, especially on installation costs and everything, is worth it to you. But the answer could very well be yes in many scenarios. But for me personally, I love to play Dreamcast on a VGA CRT monitor. And when I do play it through my TINK 4K, I usually use the retro gaming cables, component cables. Not because component's better, but because they work fine. They have that switch, so I can go back and forth for any games that are 480i only, although I think every one of them now have been patched, but whatever, just saying. I use that for versatility when I go through the TINK 4K, but for me personally, my Dreamcast is going to be through this amazing 20-inch, very, very heavy VGA monitor I always have sitting next to me. But good question, and I hope I was able to at least point you in the right direction. Well, that's it for this week. Kind of a short one this week, but took normal time to record because I had to re-record a whole bunch of sections when I started coughing through them. So hopefully I'll be better by at least the next podcast, and hopefully my voice wasn't too nasally or hoarse for this one. But anyway, as always, thanks very much for anybody who participates. And if you want to ask any question whatsoever, please just ask in the latest Q&A post wherever it is that you support, because the way the services work, it's kind of hard to figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through and answering as if we were hanging out in real time somewhere, except now you don't have to worry about me getting sick, or getting you sick, because, we're not actually hanging out somewhere. So some bonuses of doing it like this. But anyway, thank you as always, and I will see you next week.